Welcome to another deep dive. You ready for this one? Today we're going to be looking at critical race theory in education.
Yeah, I think this will be really interesting. We've got some good source material for today's deep dive.
Right. Some really thought-provoking stuff. I've got importance of critical race theory and also importance of critical race theory part 2.
Yeah.
So we're really going to dissect those articles, understand why CRT is such a hot topic when it comes to education and how it can impact students in schools.
Absolutely.
So let's just get right to it.
Yeah, let's get started.
What is critical race theory? I think that's something that we really need to define clearly right off the bat.
Yeah, for sure. I think both of the articles emphasize that it's not about individual prejudice, It's a framework for analyzing how racism is woven into the fabric of our social systems.
So it's not just about, someone being mean to someone else because of their race or something like that.
Right.
It's much more systemic than that.
Exactly. It's looking at those systems instead of focusing on a single tree. It's looking at the entire forest. It's examining the laws, policies, and practices that perpetuate racial inequalities, often in ways that are not obvious.
So you're saying, like, it's not just about looking at the paint on the wall. It's like looking at the blueprint of a building.
That's a great analogy.
And speaking of blueprints, one of the examples that really jumped out at me when I was reading these articles was redlining.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I remember hearing about that. Wasn't that the practice of denying loans in certain neighborhoods based on race?
Exactly. They would literally draw red lines on maps to exclude Black and minority communities from accessing loans.
Whoa.
And, that might seem like ancient history, but it's not. The legacy of these policies continues to shape our communities even today.
Really?
Oh, yeah. The articles cite some really startling statistics showing that neighborhoods that were redlined decades ago still experience lower property values, higher poverty rates, less access to quality education and healthcare. It's a stark reminder of how past injustices can have long-lasting repercussions.
That's really interesting, and it makes you wonder how much of where we are today is affected by things that happened in the past and these kinds of historical injustices.
For sure. And that's one of the key points that CRT brings to light. Race doesn't exist in a vacuum. One of the core tenets of CRT is recognizing how race intersects with other forms of oppression.
Okay, so it's not just about race, it's about how race interacts with other things.
Exactly.
Like what?
Well, our sources emphasize that CRT looks at how race intersects with factors like gender, class, sexual orientation, and disability to create like a very complex web of disadvantages.
It's not about, pointing fingers or anything like that. It's just about trying to understand the complex layers of systemic issues that lead to inequality.
Right. And one of the things that the articles really highlight is that it validates the experiences of marginalized students.
So you're saying it's helping them to see their struggles.
Yeah.
Not as personal failings, but as the result of these deeply embedded systems.
Precisely. And one of the key insights from our source material is that systemic racism often manifests in very subtle ways, like microaggressions, for instance, in the workplace, which can accumulate over time to create significant disadvantages.
Yeah, and those little things, they add up, don't they? They can really have a huge impact on someone's opportunities and well-being.
Absolutely. And for students from majority groups, CRT offers a really valuable opportunity to develop empathy and understanding. It encourages them to step outside of their own perspectives and see the world through a different lens.
Have you ever felt like your perspective wasn't fully understood?
Oh, I think all of us have at some point.
Yeah, it's about bridging those gaps in understanding. In CRT, it encourages us to have open dialogue and consider different points of view.
Yeah, and that open dialogue, that's crucial. It connects to another important aspect of CRT, which is the emphasis on critical thinking.
So we're not just accepting everything we're told, we're really being equipped to question the things we're told.
That's right. We're looking beyond the surface level and understanding how those historical forces have shaped the world we live in.
Right. And how social forces have shaped the world we live in. So it's not just about memorizing facts. It's about developing the ability to think critically and analyze information, especially when it comes to things like race and inequality.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us into another application of CRT, which is its potential to transform our educational system by creating more inclusive curricula.
So we're talking about moving beyond the traditional Eurocentric perspective and incorporating a wider range of voices and experiences.
Absolutely. Our sources highlight the need for curricula that reflect the diversity of our society, and that gives students a more complete understanding of history and culture and the contributions of people from all backgrounds.
It makes you wonder how many stories have been left out of our textbooks, right?
Right. Exactly.
And that benefits everyone. Whether you're from a marginalized group or not, I think having access to a more diverse curriculum just makes you a more well-rounded person. Helps you understand the world better.
Precisely. And it goes beyond the content of the curriculum, too. CRT also encourages schools to examine their own practices and policies for internal inequalities.
So it's not just what's being taught, but how schools operate, whether their policies and practices are actually maybe perpetuating inequality.
That's right. The articles discuss the importance of examining things like disciplinary policies, resource allocation, and even like small things like classroom interactions to see if they disproportionately impact certain groups of students.
It really makes you think about your own experiences in school, huh?
Yeah.
I'm thinking back now, like, were there hidden inequalities at play that I didn't even realize?
Yeah, and asking those questions is the first step towards creating a more just and equitable educational system. And this is where things get really practical because we're not just talking about theories, we're talking about how those theories translate into real world change.
So it all starts with awareness, right?
Exactly.
Understanding how all this stuff can manifest in everyday life.
Understanding that these systems are at play in our everyday lives, that's one of the most impactful takeaways from our source material. It's about challenging us to dig deeper and understand the complexities of race and inequality.
So I like how you said before that it's like upgrading your mental operating system. Like
Yeah.
you're seeing things you didn't see before, like you
Yeah.
said, the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
You're seeing these patterns you never noticed before and understanding the connections between things.
Right. And that awareness is crucial for making informed decisions, both in our personal lives and as citizens.
So it's not just an academic thing. It's about how we interact with each other, how we participate in our communities, how we vote, how we advocate for change.
Absolutely. And it's especially important these days where we're just bombarded with information from every direction. CRT helps us evaluate that information, figure out what's true, and form our own
It's
opinions.
like a BS detector, a
Exactly.
BS detector for all the noise out there.
And this deeper understanding can lead to more effective action. You mentioned that before, and I think it's worth reiterating.
Yeah.
Our sources point out that understanding systemic racism through the lens of CRT, empower students to advocate for more equitable policies,
Mm.
for meaningful social change. It's about becoming an active participant in shaping a more just and equitable society.
And it all starts with understanding the systems, the history, and the power dynamics, right?
Absolutely.
I think before we move on, I just want to connect this all back to our listeners. Why should they care about CRT? What's in it for them?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important takeaways is that it helps us see the world in this new way, a more critical way. It challenges us to look deeper and understand the complexities of race and inequality. And it's really about going beyond those simple sound bites and grappling with the nuances of these issues.
I love that. It's about having those tough conversations and challenging your own assumptions.
Right.
I think that's really where the growth is, both personally and collectively. So for our listeners out there, this deep dive is about equipping them to think critically about these issues and to become more active and informed participants in shaping a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. And that journey starts with, becoming more aware of the language we use when we talk about race and inequality. Our sources really suggest paying attention to whose races are being amplified, and whose stories are left untold.
Yeah. So it's like becoming a more discerning media consumer, I guess you could say.
Right.
You're not just passively taking in information, you're thinking about it.
Absolutely.
Where's this coming from?
Yeah.
And what's the agenda here? What's the intent?
Exactly. And once you start to kind of pay attention to those cues,
Mhm.
the sources encourage you to go beyond the surface level, dig deeper into that historical context,
Oh, I see.
into those systemic factors, the power dynamics that are at play.
So it's like peeling back the layers of an onion. There's always more to uncover, right?
Precisely.
Start to discover all these complexities.
And our sources suggest that, as you start to peel back those layers, you'll start to see these examples of systemic racism everywhere.
Really?
Oh, yeah, it might be in the news you consume, the policies that shape your community. It might even be in your personal experiences.
It can be a little unsettling when you start to see these patterns that you maybe haven't noticed before.
Oh, it can be, but the sources emphasize that that discomfort, that's a necessary part of this process.
Okay.
It's about confronting those uncomfortable truths and using that knowledge as fuel for positive change.
So it's not about dwelling on the negative. It's about using that awareness as a springboard for action.
Exactly. And, the sources argue that CRT, it doesn't just offer a framework for understanding systemic racism, it empowers us to challenge it, to
Yeah.
challenge those systems,
I see.
and to work towards that more just and equitable society.
That's really where the power is, right?
Yeah,
Not just understanding the problem, but doing something about it.
absolutely. And that work can take many forms. The articles talk about a lot of different things, the importance of engaging in difficult conversations,
Okay.
supporting organizations that are working towards racial justice, advocating for policies that promote equity.
It sounds like it's all about taking that intellectual understanding and turning it into something concrete, into action.
Exactly. It's about moving from awareness to action, recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society. And it's important to remember that this is a journey, it's not a destination.
Yeah, I like that. It's not like you reach some perfect state of enlightenment. It's like a constant process
Absolutely.
of learning and reflection and action.
And that's the beauty of CRT. It's not a static set of answers. It's an ongoing process of inquiry and reflection and action.
Right.
It encourages us to constantly challenge our assumptions and to be open to new perspectives and to never stop learning.
I think that's especially important these days when everything's changing so fast. Information is constantly evolving.
It is, and the articles stress the importance of staying engaged, and informed and connected to that ongoing dialogue about race and inequality.
So we've covered a lot in this part of our deep dive. We started by understanding these core principles of CRT, and then we looked at how it can be a tool for social change. But before we go on to the last part, I want to bring it back to our listeners.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway here?
That's a great point. As we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this question. How are you going to use this understanding
I like that.
to make a difference in your life, in the world around you?
Yeah, that's a really powerful question, I think. It makes it real. This isn't just some theory we're talking about.
Right.
It's about how we can actually use this to make a difference.
And you don't have to be like a scholar or an activist to contribute to a more just and equitable world. Our sources suggest starting with small, meaningful steps.
Yeah, like what?
Well, it could be something like having a conversation with a friend about these issues, or maybe supporting an organization that's working to dismantle these systems.
Right, or even just taking a look in the mirror and thinking about your own biases.
Exactly. The articles really emphasize that personal reflection is a crucial starting point. A willingness to challenge your own assumptions.
It's about being okay with being a little uncomfortable sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how you grow.
Absolutely. And you're not alone in this journey. One thing that our sources make clear is that there are so many people out there working to create a more just and equitable world. Connecting with those communities can be so empowering.
Yeah, there's strength in numbers for sure.
Absolutely.
That's a message that comes through loud and clear in both of these articles.
It does. It's a reminder that CRT isn't about blaming anyone.
No.
It's about understanding the systems, acknowledging the history, and embracing our shared responsibility to create a better future.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into critical race theory in education, we want to leave you with a final thought.
Yeah.
You've learned about the core principles of CRT, you've explored its potential to empower people, and you've considered its role in shaping a more just and equitable world.
And now it's time to take all of that and put it into action.
That's right.
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for change. And remember, we're all in this together.
That's right. We all have a role to play. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.